Hey there, this is Brian Lawrence coming to you with another episode of the Selling Bliss podcast, and I'm so excited to welcome Dale Dupree with me. Dale, how you doing, man?
Chilling, bro. Just out here in very sunny Townsend, Tennessee. They call it the peaceful side of the Smoky Mountains. Getting a pizza for my wife while my son plays in what they call a natural playground. If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's basically just like rocks and sticks.
Let the imagination run wild, build some forts, and I know he's going to be a future. You are the leader of the sales rebellion, so he's probably got like his own rebellion going on right now, battling some folks. But to start us off, how did you become the leader of the sales rebellion, and what is that, man?
Yeah, I really have to go back to the beginning to tell the story effectively. And there's parts of it that aren't necessarily it's not that they're worth telling, but they are, they're for me, essentially, at the end of the day, right? Those little pieces that like defined how I got to where I got in a way that people don't necessarily need to hear. But the very important things that people need to hear is that in 1984, my father, who was working at a very, very, very popular very big organization at the time in the territory that they were in the state of Florida, which was the entire state. He had everything basically promised to him at that point as the number one rep. Hey, the company is going to get passed down to you at some point. Hey, your fame and your fortunes are just going to keep rising. However, this company was extremely corrupt and did things and I should say did business in a way where people like to say things like it's not business, it's personal. You want to talk about like that on level 1 million. That's basically what was happening in this organization. Some things that ultimately, like I said earlier, there are parts of the story that don't necessarily need to be told at the end of the day, sometimes because of the identity of things like slander. And even if you tell the truth, right, it could feel like that, right? So
lawyers
without getting into,
cost a lot of money, man.
they really do, bro. So and most of those people are dead. God bless them, and they hopefully their lineages are changing and breaking the curses of the fathers and mothers of those that were creating what they did. But bottom line being that my dad was very young, he was very impressionable, and he had a good heart. That ultimately there was something that he saw with this organization that he didn't like, and he wanted something more. And so he took a leap of faith. He was very intentional. Right, I like to point that out. And he left the organization and started his company. This is 1 year before I was born. So I come out of the womb bleeding toner, basically. And so it's like running through my veins.
Yeah.
And the story goes that I eventually end up in Copier Sales. I'm like the prodigal son. Right. Yeah. And it starts in that day. Okay. It's not because daddy had a business or because Copier Sales are all that I could do. It was because of intentional action that my father took. And because of that, throughout my life and in my story, you'll find a lot of intentional action. Even in the dumbest days of my life, you'll find intentional action. And it's because of this influence that I had from this man that even if it was like subconscious that I was learning it because of his willingness to take risks and to dare mighty things. Yeah. And so when I looked at Copier Sales, like a lot of people might look at it as, I don't know what people look at it as, to be honest with you, like I've romanticized it on to a point that like even when people tell me how they feel about it, I don't even hear them, to be quite frank with you, because I've experienced it so much differently. But when I looked at Copier Sales, I looked at something like that would fuel me and that would mold me, and it would be hard, but ultimately that I would become someone like my father, who I looked up to and I thought was an awesome person, even if I was a crappy teenager at certain points in my life, right? So I heeded the call. I went sold copy machines, and I lasted 13 years. And I had a lot of fun, and I made a lot of money, and I sold a lot of copy machines and was recognized all over the place, from magazines to national publications to manufacturers, the works, right? But ultimately there was something pulling at me, which was the rebellion and stepping outside of my comfort zone and leading a rebellion, not just starting one, but leading one that ultimately will give back to a community and allow that community to take the flag and to run with it themselves. Where my goal and vision for starting this organization is to become a whisper within the crowd, right? Not to be some face at the top. That's why this company isn't called Dale Dupree Sales Training. Not to be some kind of worshipped idol. I just want to be a man that people looked at and understood as a normal person that influenced them and gave them permission to rebel. And ultimately that permission became their intentional action, which led to their success. And those stories are already happening, and they're beautiful. And I couldn't be more grateful for it, but we got a lot more to tell. So this is
We
just
got
the
a
start.
lot to cover. Yeah. And I think one of the coolest things about you, man, is the fact that you're really authentic, and you publicly share the ups and, even more so the downs. Like, everyone shares the ups, like, here's the huge win. But like, you've really shared the journey. And let's take a step back to, sure, everyone thinks the copier game is super glamorous, but maybe one or two people think it's more like that you're partnering with the guys over at Dunder Mifflin. And yet you really carved a niche in copier sales. Can you talk a little bit about like how you built your own brand within copier sales and what that was like, and how you survived and thrived for 13 years in the copier game?
Yeah, 100%, bro. I appreciate the question and the ability to speak on it. I woke up one day a couple years into copier sales, and I realized I was going to have like a decent year, and that I could potentially have an even better one the following year. But I said to myself, well, why did you have such a good year? And I asked myself the really hard questions, and I was very honest with myself. And basically what I came to the conclusion of is that I was consistent enough, and that my experience was different enough, but that I still fell flat in mediocrity constantly around certain things, like not telling the prospect X, Y, and Z because they didn't ask, and it would hinder the sale if I said those things. And just the small stuff, right?
Yep.
That ultimately leads to very big issues, right? And ultimately leads to your ultimate success. And what I started to realize was like, well, what if I was just honest with these people and I lost the deal? But because I was honest, that somehow that would come back in my favor. And I started to change the way that I communicated because of it. And then I started to think, well, what if the industry really needs a revolution, and it needs a warrior to come and lead that? And then what if like the revolution isn't just, this identity of like a warrior leading it, as much as it's this identity of a person that is out there in full empathy of the people that they seek to serve, and understanding that copy machines suck, but everybody needs them and uses them.
Yep.
Right. At the time, especially. Now there's a little debate on that for sure. Right. But ultimately at the time, it wasn't just a commodity product, which it was like the single most important thing in your office on a Friday at 4:00 when it wasn't working. Right. And so when I really tapped into that identity of being empathetic toward people's situations, instead of like drawing blood from the wound or pouring salt on it, or the way everybody else was doing it, that people could relate to me. And so the Copier Warrior wasn't this guy that was going to come in and be your knight in shining armor. The Copier Warrior was this guy that got it. He understood, like he rose above the status quo because of those things. And so the brand went nuts because of what I recognized too, is like brand is influence. That's what it really is. Like, and so is sales. Sales is influence. You can sit around and say all day that you're convincing people or persuading them to do stuff, but those things are tied to manipulation ultimately. So why would you want that? Well, I want you to make a decision to go with me because you like me. And because ultimately, even if it's a surface level of likability, that it will cause you to want to trust me, to want to draw in further and deeper. And that trust is the ultimate piece of the puzzle to sales. And so for me, it was, hey, cool. How can I cause so much radical candor in the way that I'm interacting with people from the very front of the cold call? So I'm not on the phone calling you going, hey, this is Dale with North American Office Solutions. I'd like to sell you a copier. I'm on the phone going, hey, it's Dale. Did you get my 6-foot cardboard cutout of myself stabbing a copy machine? That was you.
That was you.
Right. These are the conversations that I was having with people. Right. And so because of that, ultimately I was meeting people like friends. And the Copier Warrior became somebody that tapped into humor. I had business cards that looked like toner bottles. I had crumpled up pieces of paper that said, hey, you're going to throw me away anyway because I'm sales garbage, right? So I pre-crumpled this to make it easier. I had literally had replicas of copy machines that were like either exploded from a piece of dynamite, or, all kinds of things that people wanted to do to their machines, right? Like my favorite and the most infamous is a brick that I used to drop off. I used to drop off this copier brick. Josh Braun found out about this brick while I was still selling copiers, as a matter of fact, and blew me up on the internet over it, right? And there's a little card or a cutout, 4x6 cutout that came with it that was like a comic strip, basically. It was very poorly done at the time, especially with the budgets that I had back in the day. And the brick was just a piece of sponge when I first started that I painted red. right? And I would do like 20 of them at a time because it just took so much time. But ultimately, the
Yep.
time is the most important thing that we can give to each other. And so the more time I put into these things and intentional action that I take toward it, the better my outcomes were. Imagine you go to a hospital where you got 20 copier guys from not just in the territory, but all over the state are making calls to try and sell 174 machines at $2 or $3 million. And this guy walks in with this little brick and he says, hey, could you give this to the person that has to deal with the copy machine the most? And then these instructions, it's like, chuck this as hard as you can and feel emotional relief in the moment. And then, if you want to fix it, you can give me a call sometime. Right. So it was fun. It was playful. It was witty. It was empathetic ultimately. And people saw that, they latched that, and they believed in that. And so again, the Copier Warrior is a brand, right? And a brand is a movement, because a movement is people believing in something that they want to see change around or a difference in, right? And that change factor is very hard to get people to buy into, but when they see it as something very light, very playful, very easy, it's much different, right? Than being like, hey, it's time for you to get sober. That's a hard piece of change right there, bro. But if I could come in on this like very low, very easy point of entry, right? Like no resistance came from that, which allowed me to get to that point of, hey, it's time to get sober. And because the change was already starting, when I asked them big questions like, are you going to leave your 20-year, incumbent to come to me? It was very easy for people to say, well, based on this experience, absolutely. So that's it in a nutshell, and really the progress that I used it to make and the relationships that I built in my community.
Yeah. So how, you hear from gurus, hey, if you're in sales, you got to be making 50, you got to make 100 calls a day. How do you do, how are you mailing 50 or 100 bricks a day, or did you take a different approach, man?
Bro, F that approach. So people that are like, and listen, this is no shame, especially to you, Brian, if this is a way that you've led your teams at some point. Like I was a numbers guy, but I believe that the numbers are a lie. I sat down one day and I said, I don't want to do a cold call for an entire year. How do I get to that place? And I started building this reputation and ultimately this brand that I was so well known in my territory and community, which I look at as a community, that ultimately I could show up anywhere and talk to anybody. And I never had to cold call a single soul. And I actually in 2016 was the year I did it. And I sold over $1 million in hardware to net new businesses without ever cold calling anyone. I just literally used an existing network that I had cultivated and had introductions done for me. Sometimes people would take the things I gave them and give them to other people because I was asking, right? So I defied the logic on those things in my career. And so because of my own experiences, I believe we've been lied to. And here's what I mean. Any rep that's listening right now, who are the 10 people that you want to get into the front door of so badly, but you can't? My recommendation to you would be to sit down and use the creative theories that the rebellion has created, and I'm going to give them to you right now. What is the emotional context around what you're doing? The second piece would be, are you causing undeniable curiosity? Not just curiosity, but curiosity that can't be denied. Unforgettable experiences, right? Because those can be good or bad. Right, is the idea. So, but no matter what, it's unforgettable.
They're still talking about it.
Right. It's a huge piece of the puzzle. Right. And then the third piece being, what are the typical patterns that these people are used to? So you send an email and you think, well, I read this cool guru's expression on how to send better emails. And I copied some of them and I got some responses. Like, so what? Who cares? Right. You got some responses. I don't care. Sales is a results game. Right. So just because you got an appointment doesn't mean jack to me personally. So I started to sit back and say, well, what if I sent an email that in the subject line said, I just broke the windshield of your car. And the person's like, what? And I say in the body of the email, look outside. They're like, what is happening? And they look outside and I'm standing at their car, like waving to them up in their office. Like these are literal things that I did in the course of my career to get people to pay attention to me ultimately. So now like there's some bait and switch in this as well too, right? So you got to be very careful. Right. So what I used that was another copier brick example. And at that point I made a sender block and it was foam. So I just had it sitting on the windshield of this car as if like it had just been dropped on it. Right. And I told the guy, I was like, I'm just trying to get this to you so you can throw it at your copier. I didn't mean to hurt your car.
Yeah.
But I've come by millions of times trying to see you, and you always tell me to buzz off because I'm a copier guy. So I figured this might get your attention. And if we do the 8 Mile, as Kevin Dorsey likes to call it, I love that he like created a whole thing around this, right? But back in the day, all we looked at it as in 2010, when I was by myself, not knowing what I was doing, it was proactive selling.
Yep.
So if I, in my mind, could say exactly what somebody would push back against, and ultimately that was my talk track at the very forefront of everything that I did, then I could win at least some attention from you. Because listen, time is the currency of sales, but attention is the exchange. We have to remember that. Time is important, but really it's about gaining people's attention and then maintaining people's attention. Ultimately, that's the real exchange of sales. And if we can think in this more favorable approach around giving experiences that people will never forget.
Yep.
Right. Then immediately we have something different, even if the sale doesn't happen right away, right? Or it still takes 6 months, like a normal sales cycle might. That's fine, because you've just gained one more person through this radical approach that you took to the marketplace and the way that you call that defies the numbers game, as they like to say.
Yep. And I'll tell you, from my approach, like I've managed, hundreds of SDRs and AEs at this point. And more and more, I'm convinced that, like, don't chase after the vanity metrics around how many calls and even how many meetings, but it's, at the end of the day, it's like, how many sales are you getting? And I would much rather have someone who takes the time to do 5 incredibly well thought out, unique and targeted reach outs than just like show up and throw, because I think these tools that we have today make it so easy. Like, someone can sit there and send 150 emails, or with a dialer, you can make 200 calls, right? But are you getting results? And so that's part of, is that part of what we're rebelling against, and that there's a better world out there?
100%. So let's break this down a little bit for people that are like hearing this and thinking, how do I do this? Or this isn't feasible for me. So I have SDRs all over the world, by the way, that have done things like their metric is they got to do 100 calls a day. And look, that's fine. Like, we don't shy away from that at the end of the day, because we also believe that there are ways to make those calls more effective by just doing the dials as well, too. And doing activities digitally just the same, right? So, but we have SDRs all over the world who have said, well, for 20 of these, I'm going to send them this rebel letter campaign. Right. And so they put them in this sequence of 4 letters, and their follow-up in the 20 of the 100 calls, right, to these people is always more successful. Like, that's the bottom line, because when you do something a little bit different, you're always going to see an outcome from it, even if it takes time, because that's what it's all about too. It's all about your willingness to be patient and also intentional enough through your action to continue the stream of what it is that you started. Nuancing an experience for somebody is extremely important. But at the same time too, imagine this. So like, we call 100, well, let's just say that we use like Connect and Sell, or, one of those dialers that I don't even know the name of ultimately. I'm sorry about that. I just don't really care that much. But let's just say, and shout out to those guys if they're listening.
Hearts are breaking, but still sending love their way.
Yeah.
Right?
I really literally don't care. And I love you. And like, see, people have a hard time with that. Let's just get on a tangent real quick. People have a hard time thinking that somebody that doesn't agree with them can still like them or love them. And I think that's bold. Personally, when I look and I see a bunch of these guys that are all about automation, all about sequencing on this robotic level, I don't hate them. Just don't think what they're doing is what I want for myself. And that's why I created a rebellion of people that can come and do it their own way and still love the status quo for who they are. Right. So let's say we got Connect and Sell. We're doing 1,000 dials today, and it's going to, per their average or whatever, it's going to connect us with like 30 odd, 40 odd people. And our conversion rate is like 2 to 3 of those people. Okay. These are stats I've looked at for people, for individuals. So let's just say that that's the number. So instead, for the 30 or 40 people that we connect with, this is our typical, pickup it's Kimberly at the front. Kimberly, hey, this is Dale over at the Sales Rebellion. Can I get Kevin's ear? Right. Sure. Hold on. Gets to Kevin. Hey, Kevin, Dale, Sales Rebellion here. Hey, listen, you got 2 minutes for me real quick to tell you what it is that I called. Sure, Dale. Hey, Kevin, look, I'm with a company. This is what we do to help X, Y, Z. We fix this. We fix that. Anything there in there sound familiar to you? Would you like to talk more? No, thanks, Dale. Okay. On to the next. Right. So in the rebellion, the things that we've done to help people with a formula is, again, like first and foremost, what kind of experience are we giving? Kimberly picks up the phone. Hey, Kimberly, it's Dale. Can I speak to Kevin? And look, my manager told me not to tell you where I'm calling from, because they said then you'll know it's a sales call.
Yep.
And you won't tell Kevin I'm on the phone. But if you really need to know, I'll tell you. And Kimberly is in most cases like, okay, well,
Yeah.
I need to tell him where you're calling from. And that's when you say, okay, cool. But like, make me sound really cool if you don't mind.
Hook me up.
I'm with the Sales Rebellion. See, the name is already cooler anyway, right, Kimberly? And
Yeah.
Sure, Dale. Yeah, hold on. So she might be feeling a little bit of a sense of sarcasm, but no
Yeah.
matter what, I've interrupted her typical patterns in a way that's experiential. It's not gimmicky.
Yep.
Right. Ultimately, it's like it's something that she can get behind, because she's like, I like interactions like this. Everybody does, because if something's happening to you that you're not used to having happen, you become extremely curious in that moment, right? So now I talk to Kevin, and Kevin picks up, and I say, let's just make it Brian, since we've got
let's do it.
Of sales here himself. Yo, Brian, this is Dale. Good news and bad news. Which one do you want first?
Hit me with the bad news first.
Cool. Bad news is this is a sales call, but the good news is I'm not calling about your car's extended warranty or some like weird timeshare in the middle of South Carolina that sounds free, but there's a catch. Hey, dude, can I just literally talk at you for a couple seconds so that you can get another hang up on your X's and O's over there on the wall of another salesperson that you blew off?
You earned another 30 seconds. What's next?
So this is where it always gets really fishy, right? So we believe in the rebellion, for everybody listening, that storytelling is epically impactful in these moments, right?
Yep.
So if immediately I know some things about Brian and specifics to his team size, to like just a little bit, you don't even need to do a lot, right?
Yep.
And if I give Brian a bit of a story, Brian, this morning you woke up and you walked into the bullpen, you did your Monday morning ritual, you did your 8 to 8:30 huddle with the team. You kind of felt that same energy that you normally feel. You're feeling good about the week. But the problem is the insanity of that, the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. We both know that in month 12 of this year, even though you're feeling good right now, and you're going to feel good for most of the year, you're going to be short of quota by 20%. And November, December become the most crucial months of the year. And the problem is that you're cleaning up in those moments and dragging people with you. And no one wants to be dragged, Brian. So the purpose of the call today is just to say, hey, are there some proactive things that the rebellion could help you with in regards to creative approaches to prospecting, or even creative approaches to existing clients? It might be ghosting or stalling on signing deals that we could infuse into your team. Through a couple instances where we're together. And if this just sounds like a sales pitch at this point and you're not interested, then you can go ahead and hang up on me, bro. I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
So if I can put Brian in the shoes of the thing that I want him to feel in that moment, then, Brian will either be like, you got me, or he'll be like, good try.
Yeah.
Right? Ultimately at the end of the day. But again, if instead of telling you about all the things I do, if I can hit in a literal storyboard of activating your brain to think, all right, it's Monday, I'm in my office, it's 8 o'clock. I know my huddles. Yeah, they get a little laxadaisical sometimes. I feel like I'm trying to charge cats, whatever else.
Guilty.
And thanks to your reps for speaking to me before this call. I'm just kidding. So, but again, you get the picture, right? Ultimately, it is familiarity that we're approaching with. It's storytelling that we're using. And sure, that was a kind of a thrown together generic portion of it, or version of it, but still there's impact in even just slightly differentiating what it is that you're saying and how people are hearing it. Because before the last sales call that they actually took was not like this one at all. And so even if the person says, Dale, good try, you're gonna have to do better than that, and hangs up on me. Yep. Right. They're never going to forget Dale. And the first thing that goes in the mail is a handwritten note that says, my condolences. Right. And when you open it up, it's like, to our friendship that you decided to hang up on. By the way, thank you so much for at least listening to me. Time is the most important thing we can give to each other. So thank you for yours. Signed, Dale, the guy that cold called you the other day. Those are pieces of the puzzle that just nobody does, bro.
They don't. And there's such an opportunity to stand out. And I guarantee you that is the one who, when I'm at home having dinner with my wife, hey, guess what? I got the craziest call today. But like, that's the one that stood out. And that's the one you remember versus who emailed me last Wednesday? I guarantee you I got 20 solicitations last Wednesday. And I couldn't tell you who they were, what their names were, what the companies were. I just delete, and you got to stand out. And that's what you're doing, right?
100%. And I think coming from a person that has to deal with it, like yourself or myself, I mean, bro,
Oh, sure.
everything you just said is like the truth
Yep.
for me too, that I have, there's a kid, I'll tell you, I just took, for everybody listening, I just 2 times I've taken calls from salespeople in the last 6 months, let's just say, like willingly.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Probably longer, but let's just say 6 months. The first one wrote me a message and he just talked to me. He was like, hey Dale, if this pitch sucks, I'm definitely going to need your sales training. Like that alone, like made me go, no one talks to me like this, right?
Yeah.
So I read the rest of his message and he was very honest and he was very forthright and he 100% needs my training, but also he did a great job of relating to me and creating familiar moments and showing that he at least just like looked at me for F's sake, you know? I mean, like that's what it feels like sometimes. Like, just see me. That's what your prospect feels like. Just see me, please. Could you please just see me instead of a transaction is all that you're looking at in this instance. The second one was from a guy that he had posted a video that was really funny, and I got tagged in it and I commented on it. And this guy wrote me a message and said that video you commented on, and I thought, oh, here we go. And I opened it and it was like, yo, I checked out your body of work and like you guys are the epitome of not taking yourselves too serious. And as soon as I read that, I was like, this guy, he's like, listen to my message, like, or he's really smart.
Yep. Yep.
And he just got like a word from God that was like, Dale talks about these things, right? And then he used other things that I talk about too, right? It's when you're reaching, listen, everybody listening, when you're reaching out to Brian or Dale, we are all over the internet. You can just Google us and find something unique to a point that will listen to you, but not if you use it to sell us. If you use it to connect with us and create impact with us and ultimately learn more and throw the dice at us and say, hey, I'm willing to earn something with you if it's the right fit. Would you let me in? You know, that kind of very direct, very intentional, very motivational language is good for most buyers, but we like to skirt around it for the most part.
So the one thing I see reps sometimes get caught up in is they keep researching and researching and researching. How long with people like me and you, where we've got stuff out there, it's not hard to find out, you know, likes, dislikes, couple things. How long should that research take, do you think?
So we have a 3-minute rule with a 2-minute overtime, and that's all it should take. So again, like, here's the thing for anybody listening that can't do this, like you type in Cheryl Starks at XYZ company and she doesn't come up and she's nowhere on the internet, right? That's a thing too. And you want to know what I love about that is call the receptionist and be like, hey, I was trying to find Cheryl, but the issue is that like she's nowhere on the internet. I can't learn anything about her, how the company got started. I'm really just trying to understand Cheryl a little bit better. Is this an appropriate time for you to be able to just answer a couple of questions for me? Like, how many salespeople do that to a receptionist? And this asks the reception, like, did Cheryl start the business? Was it a family member? Like, none of us. And the thing is that as the Copier Warrior, bro, I used to walk in the front door and do that if I couldn't find the information on this person. I know Cheryl's the owner and she doesn't take meetings. There's no way, but I just want to learn a little bit more about her. How'd she start the business? What are you guys doing back here? It says something about metal manufacturing. I have no idea what that even is. All of a sudden you're on a tour of the facility. You're meeting all of her kids that work there and the door is being opened because of your inquisitiveness and curiosity toward what it is that you're pointing towards. So I think, again, it comes down to like salespeople need to understand that the ultimate role of being a salesperson is seeking to know. Right. That's it. Just seeking to know it and not, seeking to sell, which is what most people are doing. Right. But if I say, here's a company doing a thing that is in the wheelhouse of the other 25 that are my clients, they're probably a prospect. There's no way they're not. Okay. It's a small margin. And so now all you need to do is figure out how to understand the people better that you seek to serve there. Build some camaraderie with them, even if it's a very light amount of rapport. I don't even like that word, to be honest with you, because I feel like ultimately you got to think about earning these people's trust. And that can be done very simply, y'all. Like, I think, Brian, you probably experienced this too, that a lot of people say things like, that's hard. That takes time. Sure, it takes time. But like if I walk into your office and you're a gun manufacturer and I leave you this case and you open it, and there's a Nerf gun inside with these like bullets that I've designed for you. And I have a note with it that says, hey, we can't really like have much fun with your guns. So this is one of mine, and I'll be back in a week with my own. And why don't we run through the halls of this place and just F each other up and shoot these darts? Like for real, like no joke. I've literally done that. So if you create moments for people, right? If you do a little research, if you have fun, if you create familiarity, it doesn't take more than 3 to 5 minutes. And when you can't find anything about them, just make the call and be inquisitive with the people there.
And let me transition from something you mentioned earlier around service and like servant leadership. And I think some salespeople have a really hard time distinguishing that from subservient. Like, I think it's this fine line, and that salespeople still need to value themselves and value their time. And you have such a great story that you've written about with the Mr. Smith example. Would you? And I think this just illustrates, valuing yourself and what you're bringing to the table. Would you mind sharing that one?
Yeah, leading up to this story is something no one's ever asked me to tell this story on a podcast. I've been on over 300 podcasts the last couple of years. No one's ever asked me to do this, right? But I love this story because leading up to this, I actually had multiple occasions where people said, all right, I got 5 minutes for you. I got 10 minutes for you. I got 20 minutes for you. When we had things like an hour blocked off. And every time I would pretty much kind of say the same thing. I would say, I don't want to waste that 5 minutes for you. You could use it for more intentional reasons. I need the 30 minutes. And I know that's my problem, not yours. But if you can't give it to me now, then I would just request that for the sake of your time and what it is that I'm trying to accomplish with you, which is to earn something here, not just to like throw out some numbers and say, what do you think? But to really earn your trust. I would just ask that we reschedule. And so this has happened to me, multiple times leading up to this particular occasion. But for the most part, it was very light and airy the way that it happened. Well, this dude comes into his office, and first off, I had to wait in the lobby, and then he sits me down, his reception sits me down. And I just remember it felt like an eternity at one point. And I was watching the clock, but I also was disconnected from the semantics. When you're a servant leader and you really are seeking to serve, you are disconnected from the outcome. You're disconnected from what's happening. You're allowing it to play out, but you also are standing up for yourself, throughout the process. So as accommodating as I was just being accommodating because I knew he would show up, right? And that if I tried to push it, there would be this request to move it, and I had experienced that in the past as well too, and realized this is a way to get rid of people at the end of the day. And I'm not going to let this guy have his way with me. Right. So I'm going to win. I'm going to be the expert here. That's how I looked at it. I'm going to be the expert in this thing that he requested me to come down and talk to him about. Now, sure, he was always just kind of like copied into the conversations. But by the time my champions were ready to rock on this thing, this was the decision maker. And he's like, well, I need to see this first. Right. And I'm thinking in my head, like, oh, here we go. Dad's in the room. He's going to shut the deal down. So he came in, and guys, I tell you, it felt like somebody stormed into the room. Like the air changed. Like I could smell like burning sulfur all of a sudden. I mean, like it was like Satan had entered in, right? And no shade to this guy. He's actually a friend of mine now. But he comes in the room, he sits down, like storms in heavy. I knew right where he'd sit. Like he set the office up so like cliche. It was like, I know what's going to happen here. So I put some stuff in front of him, some of my old marketing materials, including one of me stabbing a copy machine that's gold plated in the middle of the woods. I get this massive like Excalibur sword coming out of it. Right. And so I kind of just set all this stuff down. This guy, he sits down, he looks me dead in the eye and he goes, all right, I got 10 minutes. So literally what he says. And I mean, you've all heard the stories, but let me tell you, when someone looks at you and tells you you've got 10 minutes, you pee in your pants a little bit. Because it's a moment where it's so aggressive and like unnecessarily, right? That you'd never experience anything like it, right? In a business setting. It's suddenly like it's not like suddenly I'm on the streets and there's a gun being pulled on me, right? By any means, but it has a vibe of violence to it, right? That's undeniable, right? So he says these things, and I just remember thinking, don't squirm. That's all I said to myself. And I had already noticed that he had a light dimmer, and that when we came in, the lights were already dim, right? So I had
Yep.
this thing in my head already playing because the reception turned him up, his assistant turned him up, right? And so I was already like in this awareness state. Okay,
You had a
if
lot of
will.
time to think about it, right? I mean, you were just
Way
in
too
there.
much, bro. Way
Yeah.
too
Yep.
much time. So and honestly, bro, it just kind of rolled out of my mouth.
Yeah.
But I told the guy, I was like, to be quite frank, the only thing that we should get done in 10 minutes is a quick power nap. And I know these lights dim, right? So is that what we're doing? And basically he was looking right at me, right? Remember?
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm like throwing my hands up and giving him like body language that's like, I don't really care if you have 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And in the moment of that, as I was speaking and he's staring at me, he put his hands in front of him and he touched the papers that were on his desk, and he looked and he saw me and he moved, a card to the side and started looking, and I was just silent with him. I just sat. My dad taught me how to use silence a long time ago, and I've always utilized it. I always teach people to utilize. I just sat there in silence, nothing. Where most people would say something like, "What do you think?" or
"Yep,
yeah, that's my business card." Crazy, huh? And I just stayed in silence and just waited, just staring at this man, so he could feel me breathing into him. And he literally told me that I'm either insane or a genius. Like, he literally said that to me. And I said, well, which one is it?
Yeah.
He calls the assistant. He like later I found out like him canceling stuff for the rest of the day was like internal meetings and things that it didn't matter if they happened for him in the first place. So it wasn't like, when you read the story, even on LinkedIn, like there's always going to be a perspective, right?
Sure.
You got to tell the story right, though. And in the moment, I thought like, I'm important.
Yeah.
This guy just canceled his day for me, and we're gonna eat tacos, But he called the rest of the people. My champions came in the room after that. Later on, probably 45 minutes later, right? And we had a great conversation. The guy ended up pulling the trigger with us. $190,000 sale. So not like a small sale either, ultimately, but really, like, the things that people can hear from that is, my opinion, that the best salespeople are cool, they're calm, and they're collected. That in a moment that we also, like, as sales reps, we have to understand what it means to do things like improv or ad lib. You have to understand that, like, a moment in a room that you're aware of, and words coming out of somebody's mouth, that they're giving you this performance ultimately, that you can play with it. You don't have to be stumped by it. You don't have to think, oh, I got to use one of my 25 objection handling whatever's from whatever guru for this, and just meet people where they are. Yeah. When you meet them where they are, things will change drastically for you. And listen, I'll also say that was not the last time that happened to me. And in a commodity space like the copier world, especially when you're dealing with a champion, and then eventually, the CFO is suddenly involved, and you knew they were going to be involved the whole time, but there was nothing you could do about it. Okay. Unless you wanted to manipulate or go over people's heads, and that never goes well. So why do that? Just be patient, give the right kind of experiences, and they'll walk you through. Right. When you suddenly get to the CFO, they think in their head that this person is just the same as the rest. They all come in here promising the world. We switch to the new company, and then everything goes to crap. They pull all these things out from under the rug, and it sucks. So I always was dealing with this false perception of what salespeople ultimately were at the same time too. So I had to battle a lot of things as a salesperson, and on top of my depression, on top of my self-doubt, and some of my anger issues that I used to like disguise and mask those things. And so for me, this was a journey, and still is, around ultimate discovery of who I am and who I want to become, and what I'm going to leave on this earth as a legacy. Yep.
I've got to tell you, now I have visions of like the next time that suddenly, you pull out the phone and you've got your peaceful piano playlist that you just hit play on and start, with the mellow music for them, and just taking it one step further. But I got to tell you, like, I would like to think I would respond in pushback in some sort of creative way. But I will tell you, I know for certain early in my career, and I will tell you, I bet you 99 out of 100 salespeople, the way they would react to that would be panic, and then instantly say, I'm going to talk twice as fast, and I'm going to cut 50% of what my pitch is. And now I'm just going to talk about this. And so let me go really fast. And instead you went back to, something, kind of a theme here is around that pattern interrupt, right? That, hey, hit them where they're not expecting it. And because that guy had a playbook, but you changed the script on him, you flipped it, right?
For sure. There are bad outcomes to these things too, y'all. I told a guy
Yep.
one time in the same kind of essential moment, no, to something that they were asking to do, like I have explained in these things. And I told him in an eloquent way, right? But he said, well, then we're done here. And he slammed both hands on his table, shook the whole freaking thing. And there were two other people at this table, and then myself and my manager, right?
Yep.
Slammed his hands down and just walked out of the room like, screw you people. And
Yeah.
look, like my manager even said in the parking lot, he's like, well, this one's done. It's time to move on. But I stayed the course.
Yeah.
I won their business 6 weeks later, and it was a
Wow.
big sale, right? So the real thought here ultimately, Brian, is that it goes beyond the interrupt. It is about resolve. It is about intentional action and moments and what they lead to. It's about risk, because risk leads to the ultimate reward. It's
Yeah.
about the unknown and how we traverse it. And ultimately it's about that kind of like dare concept. Like, do you dare mighty things is what I
Yep.
like to say. It's a great presidential quote, right? And the bigger picture perspective goes beyond like a move or a play. It's about authenticity and being very genuine in that moment. I'm not a guy that's just going to walk out of a meeting without saying something, first off, that is going to light you up a little bit to some capacity, because I want you to move. I want you to feel. I want you to,
Yep.
to live a better life. I don't want to just sell you a copier. I
Yep.
want something greater. Right. And because of that, I have to show up in that moment as not the guy that's like, okay, well, then let's get this done in 10 minutes and get you on your way. Right. I
Yeah.
have to be the guy that goes, no, because that's what fuels me,
Yep.
even though it's not necessarily something that was trained for me to do. I just
Yep.
kind of stumbled into that at the end of the day. And there are people like me out there that are listening. They're like, I've done the same thing my whole career. And then there's the majority of people that do not. And that's why the status quo, in my opinion, lives in mediocrity in the
Yep.
sales world. Do they still sell? Are there people that make 600,000, 700,000 plus a year doing the opposite of what I just said? Absolutely.
Yep.
They're also the people that are struggling internally with all the secrets that they're afraid to let out, because they are people that are herded, right?
Yep.
You might think they're leaders, but they're just so willing to make the money and
Yep.
not care about anything else, that they trample over everything else in their life. This is a very deep subject for me,
Yep.
and one that I lived out, in its own way, in my own way as well too, and why ultimately I feel the way that I do about the subject, and why it's so important for sales reps. It's just about being honest. Oh, I could never
Yeah.
say that to my prospect. Then say it. If you
Yeah.
think that in your mind, then you need to freaking say it.
Yeah.
There's a good way and a bad way to say things ultimately, for sure.
Right.
And having awareness of that is important. But
Yep.
say it.
Yep.
That's what creates better bonds and deeper relationships.
And I over these last 3 years, I have spent more time one-on-one with people on my team, having really hard conversations about just the crappy things that are going on in their life and how they're feeling. And so I've, whether it's people going through divorce, battling depression, substance abuse, all these different things. And so many people have these things that they've bottled up, and it carries over, and it just permeates everything they do in work. And I'll tell you, like, the hardest thing for me to have ever shared is the fact, my dad committed suicide when I was 10, still the worst event that happened in my life. And you've been really public and shared a lot about like your battles and the journey you've been on. And I think so many people, like, to have someone in your position to put that out there publicly, I think that's, I've just seen the response to it, that it's overwhelming, because people are so appreciative of you sharing those type of things. What would you mind telling a little bit about that piece of it? Because I think it's so powerful and so important. And I have so much respect for you for what you've done in that area.
I appreciate those words, and I appreciate the opportunity to share that. Like 2016, when I lost my father to cancer, I stood up on stage in front of a sea of strange people, thousands of people that came to pay respects to my father and watch his final moments, in essence. And in my mind, I thought, a copier salesman has literally changed this community. And here they are today to show that respect. And in my heart, I said, you know why these people are here? And as they told me stories, this really started to click for me. They are here because my father never, ever hid anything from anyone. My father was so transparent about his alcoholism, his earlier life, the things that ultimately would be his demise if he hadn't have been able to conquer them himself. My father was the first person to come to you and say he was sorry, even if he wasn't in the wrong. My dad was such an incredible human, and so it's just so genuine that in those moments I realized, man, I have to stop hiding my struggles. Because some people told me, they were like, your dad's going to kill me for telling you this. And what's funny is after they would tell me some of these stories, I'd go, he's already told me that one. But at the same time, there were so many that I did hear ones that I had never heard before. And I recognized that, you know, they also knew that my dad didn't care if they told me, because my dad wasn't embarrassed or ashamed. My dad knew that man, life is struggle. Like that is what life is. It's struggle. And it's ultimately, there's a lot of failure involved in that. And at a young age, I recognized how I struggled with depression. I actually attempted suicide when I was in my teens. And my mother, God bless my mother, she's the one that saved me ultimately. And even though I still tried to kind of like hide it from her as she came home from work early, I was a child. I had no idea what I was doing. I had just sliced my body up, basically, not understanding like the actual anatomy of it and how I ultimately could kill myself. But I've been trying for 45 minutes at this point, and I probably was pretty close to finally getting it. But then, you know, she just happens to come home from work early, and then as I'm trying to hide it, she sees everything, and you know, and I'm there's blood everywhere. And I mean, what a terrible moment for a mother ultimately. But man, I was met with such compassion, and I was never made to feel embarrassed. My parents didn't tell me I had to talk about these things, but they definitely didn't encourage silence, right? That was my own prerogative and narrative. And so talking about it in my adult years and having waited so long, and even as a top performer in the sales world, I got all the way to the edge. I wrote a suicide note. I planned the whole thing out. I was over for me at that point. As I saw it, I could still feel those feelings. I can still put myself back into that place. It was so vivid and dark and terrible that it will never leave me. And it's something I've struggled with that feeling most of my life, but being able to open up about it and to be able to say, like, I thought that money and all of the success would fix me, and it didn't. And being able to also have that realization and live through what I attempted.
Yeah.
There's no greater lesson. And I hate that there's no greater lesson, but at the same time, I'm grateful to have lived through the lesson, to be able to share with other people that you don't have to take it that far, because there are genuinely people out there that love you more than you love yourself in that moment. And to come to that realization when I watched my dad be honored by a literal small city of people, I recognize just how much people love me, even if I didn't know it or I couldn't understand it. And that changed me drastically. That year changed me drastically. And I've struggled up until last year, bro. 2 years ago, 2021, I had another, almost fatal moment for myself. But thankfully because I was in a transitional state, that I could talk about it. I could say, hey, don't let me get in my car. Hey, I'm going to go to the store and buy a ton of pills. Don't let me do that. I'm going to say it's for my headaches. Don't let me do that. I was very vocal, and my wife was with me the entire time. And no matter what, she stood right next to me throughout the whole process, and didn't let me go anywhere without having some type of sight on me, whether it was FaceTiming me, whether it was being right next to me, I felt like she didn't sleep for a month. It was very, I felt very honored by my wife in those moments as well too. But like, I could never have gotten to that place if I didn't start to allow myself to open up at a younger age and earlier in my life. And man, I hate that the catalyst was losing my own dad. And I'm so sorry about your father, bro. But because our fathers are, even if we don't have good relationships, anybody out there that's listening, they're like, I didn't have a dad.
Yeah.
I have a friend, his name is Steve. His father died. He was 31 years old when his father died. His dad was in the 70s, 60s, 70s. He'd never, ever met his father. His father died. It came back to the family. He got wind of it. Steve called me crying and said, I don't understand why I'm crying, why I'm so sad.
Yeah.
And I remember in the moment I told him, I said, because bro, he was your dad.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what he did to hurt you or what he did to not even be there in the first place. He's your dad. There's a piece of you attached to that. And forgiveness is what's happening right now in your heart. And you need to seek that out, and you need to allow that to be part of the healing ultimately. And that dads are so important for us, man, just like they are for the women out there as well too. Like they play such a pivotal role in our lives as children. And so losing my dad, ultimately made it to where like I could have done two things. I could have said, well, now I have nobody to talk to, or I could just ultimately open up like a book and take the pressure, bro. I'll tell you, and for anybody listening, you 100% will receive negativity for doing what I've done. Yep. I get text messages at 2 a.m. that say, effing kill yourself, you loser, right? For people that know, and it'll come like after a post, right? I've even had people put that stuff in my comments and be banned from LinkedIn from it. Yeah. Without me even touching it ultimately. So thank you, LinkedIn. But I have suffered from the truth emotionally from people tormenting me or trying to bully me basically in the process. But I will tell you that I've never felt more free in my life, and thank God for that. And that I will never stop talking very outwardly about that problem that I've had. And I feel very delivered from it, and so people that are listening that are like, how do you get out of it? Then just hit me up and I'll tell you exactly what I've done. It will not be your story. We all uniquely have them. Yeah. But I feel very free. These last 2 years now have been very freeing. I feel a great year coming this year, right? So I'm going ahead and saying year 2 is on its way, right? But we have to fight. Right. Yep. Just like every month you're fighting for that number, for that quota. Every year you're trying to hit that goal and beat that thing up. Right. Like it's the same style of struggle. And we have to look at them realistically. Are we being intentional with the way that we fight? Or are we just trying to get to the number? Right. Yeah. Are we building something that will last? Or are we just trying to make the President's Club trip this year and get a photo on the wall, right? Yep. Because that's a memory. It's not necessarily a legacy, right? Yep. And so I would just challenge people to think more intentionally about the way that sales is life and life is sales.
Yeah, man, that's like that is your legacy. And I'm so grateful for you and, for each of those, for every single one of those just kind of nutballs who are out there with that negativity. There are thousands of people who are positively impacted with what you're doing. And thank you so much for that. If people want to find out more about you and about the Sales Rebellion, where are the best places to do it?
Yeah, I appreciate that, bro. So I'm on LinkedIn every day, linkedin.com/IN/Copier Warrior. You can find the Rebellion at thesalesrebellion.com. And then all of our social sites are just at Sales Rebellion if you go to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. But if you want to follow my content too, on top of it, it's just at Dale Rebel Leader. One word, at Dale Rebel Leader, on any of them, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. But come join the movement, come join the community, come do sales the Rebel way. We'd love to have you.
Thank you, my man. This has been amazing. Thanks so much for spending the time.
Thank you, Brian.